Hi, I'm Stephen Feinberg, Executive Director of the Rhode Island Film and Television Office, and today we have a very special guest who grew up in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, made his way to Los Angeles, and really did a fantastic job of making family movies that have touched the world. Films like Enchanted, Tarzan, and many others. I welcome Kevin Lima to the set of Double Feature. Thanks for coming.
It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
So you are being honored by the city of Pawtucket as one of the honored sons, I suppose, right? That's why.
I guess so. I've never been called an honored son, but yeah, it's a great moment to be joining this community. Really, community that I spent the first 18 years of my life in, growing up as an artist. Really.
Wow. So what kind of art did you start out with?
I've been drawing since I can remember, to be quite honest with you. I've always had a pad of paper and a pencil in my hand. So that's where it all really started. And from there, I had a grandmother, Portuguese grandmother, who was an entertainer herself. Yeah. And she took me under her wing, and I started making puppets, which led to a whole, career of being a puppeteer in Rhode Island.
Wow.
So it was a great time. It was a real great time.
So you had, so creativity was part. What about your mom and dad? What did they do? Was they supportive of the creativity?
They were supportive, definitely, and they saw that I had talent, and they supported that. As a matter of fact, I remember getting the Preston Blair book, which is one of these like Bible of animation books. Yeah. He was a big animator in Hollywood, and they got me that, I think, for my 5th birthday. Wow. Because they recognized that that's the path I wanted to take. In fact, I saw the Jungle Book, which is 50 years old, just turned 50. Right. And I saw it when I was 5 years old, and I turned to my mother when it was over and said, I'm going to make that when I grow up. And I think that became sort of another, signal to them. Oh, this kid already knows what he wants, right? So they had to support, they wanted to support that.
And I'm like you too. I knew what I wanted to do very young. And I was just talking to somebody about that who still hasn't figured out what they want to do in life. We're very lucky, and it's very rare that you know what you want to do at a young age.
Yeah, I feel really lucky.
What kind of so as you were doing that, what kind of mentors did you have? Mentors while you were in Pawtucket?
Yeah, most of my mentors come from Pawtucket or from the area, really. Yeah. So my grandmother was the first one. Making puppets with her and drawing with her. That led to when I was a teenager, I could get a job. My family, I come from a broken home, and so I was a welfare kid, and I could get a job in the city of Pawtucket. And they'd pay for it. So I went to this group called the Puppet Workshop, and they're a puppetry group, professional puppetry group. And I said, if you apply for this job, I'll apply for this job, and then I can come work for you. And that started this, through college, really, every summer. I had a job with the Puppet Workshop where I learned to build puppets, perform, direct, write stories. It all happened right there.
You had a creative outlet.
So Mark Kohler, who was the head of the Puppet Workshop, was really a big influence for me. I became a storyteller there, really.
And it gave you confidence.
Absolutely did.
That's super.
And I had a high school teacher who was a working illustrator, Bob Venditto, and he said to me, you should go into animation. That's your first love. Go for it. Grab a hold of that. And he made it sort of possible for me to feel that a kid from Pawtucket can actually make it in Hollywood.
Isn't that neat? Because honestly, back, you and I are about the same age, right? And now kids have the opportunities with the cameras or the phones or cameras. We didn't have a lot of that. So
we didn't. It was hard to make a movie when we were kids, right?
Right. It was like 8mm Super 8.
Yeah, my family couldn't afford to get me a camera, so I didn't get to make movies.
Right. So I know I did an animated film with drawings, an Inspector Bumble, and it was like 3 minutes long, and I cannot tell you how many drawings I did. Yeah. I mean, how many? When he said your passion was animation, how did you know it was animation? Or that's where you were going?
I loved movies, right? So I would always go to the Disney movies. Sometimes I'd sneak in with my little sister because I didn't want anybody to know I was in high school going to see the movies. Yeah. But yeah, I knew from going to the movies. Okay. And I would always draw the characters. I got all the albums when I was a kid, and I would draw all the characters on the album sleeves. But I never got to make a movie until I went away to
Los Angeles.
To school. Yeah.
Okay. Did you? So now you went to Los Angeles. Where did you go?
I went to Cal Arts.
You went to Cal Arts.
Right.
And that's just outside of...
Los Angeles, just north of Los Angeles,
right.
half hour north.
Yep. And what did you learn while you were there? What was the... And what were the relationships that you built while you were there?
Well, I learned how to be an animator, to be quite honest with you, and what that meant. I'd never sat behind my desk drawing, 12 to 24 drawings per second.
Right.
To make that here I am flipping like the old hand-drawn way of making movies. So I'd never done any of that, and I never, I learned how to storyboard. I learned how to work as a community, right? Because animated films are made by hundreds of people working together. So I learned. Oh man, there are so many steps. It's really intensive.
I have to ask you. Okay, so when you went to Disney for the first time,
right?
Did you do the whole tour, going to the ink and paint and all the different buildings?
Yeah, when you first start at Disney, you have like an induction. You have to go through this class, Disney University, where they take you around the lot and show you, oh, this was Walt's office. This is the ink and paint building. Right. This is
that multi-plane camera that's there.
Yes. Yep. So they give you a whole introduction. So I actually started when everything was hand drawn and everything was inked and painted.
Right.
Computers were just starting to come into the the making of a movie.
Yeah. I'm going to backtrack. So you were at Cal Arts, and you're now learning how to technically do an animated project. You develop friendships, and then it's time to get out of school.
Right.
Where do you go? What happens? What happens to Kevin Lima?
Well, for me, it was an interesting journey because I graduated, and it was the first year that Disney didn't hire anyone.
And this is in
1985.
Okay.
85, yeah. And so they had just done The Black Cauldron, which was a financial failure for them.
And that was Disney's really big effort to produce, again, a big 2D animated film.
Right. And movies like Star Wars had come out.
Right.
And they were trying to figure out how to speak to that audience, right?
Right.
And it just didn't work. It didn't work. So in that point in time, they sort of shut everything down. They went down to a little core group of people, artists, and they weren't hiring anyone. They were figuring out who they were.
Right.
Right. So we all went out into the world to, who were we? Who were we in the animation field, right? If we weren't Disney animators, what we had hoped to be our entire lives, what were we?
Right.
Was there something else?
And then there's a question, too, is animation, feature film animation, dead or dying?
Right, because we had invested everything in being Disney animators, right? Students went to Cal Arts specifically to get scooped up by Disney.
Right.
So if we weren't that, who were we in this industry?
Right.
And luckily, there was an ex-Disney animator who was making a film, his name's Jerry Reese, called The Brave Little Toaster. And I was one of, I want to say 30 individuals, 30 individuals who worked for 6 months in LA. I designed characters, I did some test animation, and then the whole production was going to Taiwan.
Wow.
So I raised my hand and said, I'll go to Taiwan. And so I got on a plane first time out of the country.
That was pretty neat because sometimes I know even storyboarders can work in LA, and then if a feature film will go to another country, they won't take them, but they took
Correct.
You guys.
Yeah, I think because the studio in Taiwan was doing, Cuckoo's Nest was the name of the studio, they were doing their first animated feature.
Okay.
So they wanted to bring a couple of American veterans, which I had only been working for 6 months, which was amazing. And we went to Taiwan and helped sort of set the look of the movie.
Yeah.
I was doing, I think, in an industry that was typically doing 5 feet a week. At Disney, you did about 5 feet a week of animation.
Yep.
And we were trying to do 30 feet a week of animation.
Wow.
So it was a big learning curve
wow.
for us, but a great experience. And
how many other animators were there on that project? Do you remember?
Oh boy. No, I don't remember how many. There were probably 9 of us from the United States, and then there must have been 20, 30 from Taiwan.
And was there a barrier with the language or no?
There always is.
Yep.
There always is, but you find ways to get through it.
Yep.
And because you can draw, it's another language that you share, right?
Right.
So you can sit down and look at somebody's work and draw over it, and suddenly you're communicating.
When you were one of the 9... out of, let's say, a total of 30 animators, did you find yourself at that point saying, oh, I want to direct, or were you starting to build? Was that starting to build or no?
It really started much earlier, right?
Yep.
Because when I was at the Puppet Workshop, I was basically building and directing shows.
Right.
So I had a sense of what it was to be a collaborator on an intimate level, right? So becoming an animator was difficult for me because I wanted to touch the whole thing.
Right.
Right? So when I actually went to Disney, I moved from movie to movie to movie to movie, trying different parts of the process.
Right.
Till finally I raised my hand and said, hey, I want to be a director.
I know this, I know this, I know this, and I know this.
Right.
And I understand these different
Right.
functions.
And it was hard for me to sit behind a desk for 8 hours a day.
Right.
Because my mind is thinking about the bigger picture.
Right.
Right?
So you're in Taiwan for how long?
Probably 6 to 7 months.
Okay. And then does that catapult you to an opportunity now at Disney? Because you've just done this Brave Toaster and...
He's little, the Brave Little
Brave
Toaster.
Little Toaster, excuse me. No offense. Brave Little Toaster, so is that what then, that work begets work? Is that what happens?
It actually led me to another job in LA. So from there I went and worked on the Chipmunk Adventure, where I met Glenn Keane, who was one of the greatest Disney animators to ever live, really. And he was working on that movie. He had left the studio for a moment, was working on that movie, and said, you know what? You should be at Disney. Why aren't you over at Disney?
They didn't hire me.
I said, well, I applied, but they didn't even, they just said, no, nobody. And so he said, well, why don't you apply again?
Yeah.
And in doing that, I got another chance. So.
And now, and at that time also, you had, on an executive level, right, you had Michael Eisner and Jeffrey Katzenberg have now taken control, right, of...
They had just stepped in at that moment, yeah.
So they were doing films like, they had created the Touchstone division.
Label, right.
Right, and they did like Splash, I think was the first film on Touchstone.
Right.
So that, in a weird way, that could have been a Kevin Lima film.
It really could.
Right.
Really could have. And it's an influence.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now there's a whole, they're finally getting their feet. They're finally finding out who they are and what their brand is.
Right.
And now you're brought in.
Right. I came in at that moment when Jeffrey Katzenberg and Michael Eisner were finding their way through animation. They'd never made an animated film before, and they're trying to figure out what is an animated film. How do we develop an animated film, which develops a little bit differently than a live action movie. And I worked on Basil of Baker Street, which actually became The Great Mouse Detective.
Which I love, with Vincent Price and his Ratigan character.
Right. And so I got to animate on that under Glenn Keane. So I was an animator in his unit on the character Fagin. Yeah. So I got a lot of experience doing that.
And I remember there was something really special about that Big Ben sequence. And I don't know if there was something, I don't think it was computer, had a little taste of computer, I'm not sure.
Yeah, it was a combination of computer generated imagery. So all the gears in that clock sequence were developed and actually printed off the computer.
Okay, so that was transitional then.
Yeah, it was really the first time it happened, I think, in 2D animation. And then they animated by hand on top of that.
Okay, because I remember there was that was new. I remember that being new.
Yeah, it was a big deal.
And what about at the same time, or maybe a little earlier, Oliver and Company, was that around then with the Billy Joel and the singing and the?
Well, actually, we're a little bit out of order here.
Okay.
Because The Great Mouse Detective was happening. You know, we brought in I brought in Fagin, and Fagin is actually from Oliver and Company.
Oh, you're right.
So I didn't, got confused for a minute here.
You're right.
So I actually didn't animate on The Great Mouse Detective. That was happening when I was hired. I actually started working on Oliver and Company.
That's the
Fagin character with
Why
that movie.
Why should I worry?
Yeah,
right?
Billy Joel. I animated on that.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, I did a couple of scenes on that. But while The Great Mouse Detective was happening, I was doing character designs. So I came in and started doing character designs on The Little Mermaid.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I did a lot of work on Ursula.
Yeah.
Back when Howard Ashman wanted that character to be based on Divine.
Oh, right.
Right.
Oh,
So I did a bunch of designs based on that. They were gruesome. But
continue to resonate.
Yeah,
I mean, right?
yeah, you can see it in the character.
Absolutely.
And I designed all the characters for Under the Sea and Kiss the Girl.
Wow.
So all the extra characters. So I got to do that pretty early on. Then went and animated Fagin on Oliver and Company.
Got you.
Right,
Okay.
with Glenn Keane.
Yep. So now, Little Mermaid is the new. Isn't that the spark of the new wave of the golden?
That's like the beginning, what they call the renaissance of Disney animation. Sort of started with that movie, I think.
Right.
Yeah, and it really brought the Broadway musical and the animated feature together. It was the first movie to do that.
Right. And didn't you meet your wife? When did you meet your wife?
I met my wife at school, actually.
Oh, okay.
So I was a senior, she was a freshman. We're the same age, though.
Yeah.
And so we started our careers somewhat together. She moved into Disney as a storyboard artist a couple of years later. And we got married while working at Disney.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
So now, how do you transition into, is it, you do the Goofy movie, is the first film you direct for them?
It is, yeah.
How does that transition happen?
Well, I worked on a whole lot of movies. I worked on Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast. I did storyboards on Aladdin. And when that was wrapping up...
Great films, by the way. All great films.
Thank you. I was really lucky, really, to hit at that moment. When I got out of school and I thought, oh man, it's dead. There's nothing going on. And then suddenly the momentum of these other movies starts to take shape.
But it's the talent with the opportunity and maybe also the idea that, and maybe we can talk about this too, about being a team player, being having a good attitude.
I think it's three things, really, is that I had a lot of ambition that was born when I was young, right? I knew to ask for things, to ask for what I wanted, to ask everybody for what I wanted. So that was a big learning moment for me when I was younger. We talked about how I put together my puppet workshop job by talking to the puppet workshop and talking to the welfare department in Pawtucket. Put that together. So I learned pretty early on to ask for what I wanted. And then I think there's a level of having enough training that you can actually do the job when you get the job, right? Because there's a lot of people who ask for things who don't know how to do the job.
Right.
So for actually being able to do the job, and then there's luck. I think being at the right place at the right time and having asked for what you wanted over and over again and being lucky enough to meet that one person who can say yes to you, right? Those are big things.
I'm a big believer that you make a lot of your own luck.
I think that's true. And this moment in time that we're talking about when I made this transition is about asking for what I wanted and asking the right people. So
don't you think it's important too to make friends?
It absolutely is.
Because
absolutely
friends look out for one another, and the idea that you can be, you're talented, you're hardworking, you're dependable, you're reliable, and you create, and then you also have a nice presence about you. That's really important.
Right, right. Because I got a Goofy movie by first asking Disney for a chance to direct, and they said no. Their slate was full. They had the next 5 years mapped out. So I said, okay, I'm going to go and look for an opportunity somewhere else.
Yep.
So I went off, developed a couple of things. They didn't happen. And Jerry Reese, the director of A Brave Little Toaster, was developing a Goofy movie at the time. He decided not to do it, and he said, what about Kevin Lima?
Oh.
So it really plays back into your friends, right? Your collaborators.
You put the bug in there, you let people know what you wanted,
right?
And then it circled back around. Not at the exact same time that you wanted,
right?
But it did circle back around.
Right, but with perseverance, right? I kept saying, I'm going to make this happen.
Yep.
And so it was really some sort of godsend of all those things coming together to put me in that place and time to be able to direct that movie.
And then did Goofy lead to Tarzan?
It absolutely did.
Tell me about that. It's one of my favorites. I love Tarzan.
So with a Goofy movie, again, I went to Paris to direct that movie. So we started in LA, we put together the story, then we went to Paris to do the animation.
Wow. How long was that?
I must have been there for about a year.
Wow.
Doing that.
Yep.
So again, leaving the country, taking advantage of opportunity, seeing another part of the world. So all these great things came together in that moment. And that movie ended, and Jeffrey Katzenberg said, he handed me the book of Tarzan and said, I want this to be your next film. And I read it, and of course, I've always been a sort of a fan of the primate world. Yeah. I was a big animal nut when I was a kid, right? Goes together with being a cartoonist and drawing. And so this moment takes place, and then so I get all excited about it. He wants to do it in Vancouver with a smaller studio. And I said, boy, man, we could barely animate Goofy. How are we going to animate a naked man with a new group of animators who are just starting out? I didn't know how we were going to do it, but I said, okay, I'll figure out if this can happen. And then Jeffrey leaves the studio in that moment in time. Really? So again, a big transition. He goes and starts DreamWorks.
Right, okay.
So in that moment, I felt like, well, what's going to happen now? I want to do this movie. I'm all excited about it now. I'd already started to put together sort of outlines and ideas. That little image of the little baby hand inside the gorilla hand was something I had drawn in the book while I was reading the book. So I was already starting to come up with visual imagery.
Iconic images.
Yeah, and so he left, and he wanted me to come and work at DreamWorks. His whole scenario had changed, right?
Steven
so now
Spielberg and David Geffen,
yeah. And but I wanted to do Tarzan. And luckily enough, I think there was this war for talent at that time. Eisner decided to make Tarzan at feature animation because a Goofy movie was made at the television division.
Right.
This was made for a much smaller budget.
Right.
At a time when they were spending $100 million, we were spending 20, right, to make a movie.
So now Tarzan.
So now
Michael
Tarzan is
Eisner
happening.
says, we're going to make this. I'm not going to let Katzenberg and DreamWorks poach my talent.
Right.
I'm making this movie. Kevin Lima, you're directing it.
Right.
And
That's
you're
how-
working with Phil Collins, the music,
Right.
Tell me about this. I love this movie.
Thanks. It was just a great, coming together of talent and,
Who did the screenplay?
The screenplay was written as they are in animation. They're not necessarily just written in one moment in time.
Yep.
So it was written over time by many different people.
Yep.
There was Tab Murphy, who started on the movie. Then we moved through, and a lot of the storyboard artists who are charged with visualizing the story before you animate it. We had a lot of writing that happened internally through that process.
So they're expanding the sequences, right? That's what they're doing?
Yeah, you know what? Animation is this wonderful sort of confluence of art and writing and all the mediums coming together. And you get to see the movie before you make the movie. So the editorial process kind of happens over 2 years. Right? So you're putting together the movie, looking at it, saying, this doesn't quite work. They shouldn't go to England. That's a whole different story. Let's stay in the jungle. And you throw out that part of the movie and you bring in, a different ending for the film. So we're working that way organically.
Are you also having to, when you're working on this, are you also dealing with the Disney brass executives? How involved are they as far as story development and?
Because you can see the movie early on, everybody's involved.
Yeah.
And the real tough thing about being a director in animation is managing all of those visions, because everyone doesn't necessarily share one vision for a film, right? And the corporation is looking for something different from a movie than the director. An animator who's working on one character is looking for something different than the director. So it really is a balancing act of keeping everything in, towards one final vision. It was easier on a Goofy movie, actually, because we were spending less money. It had to happen faster.
Right.
So I could be more in control.
And this was a big project for Disney.
This is huge. And you're bringing in Phil Collins, right? They're putting a tremendous amount of funds behind it.
Right.
So there's a lot at stake.
Yeah.
Right? So you manage that. And
did you have fun? Did you feel the pressure? Is it stressful? What is it when you're doing?
It's all of that.
Right.
It's everything at once. And I think it's like that in a live action movie as well. Right. But to work with Phil Collins, to collaborate with all those top-notch animators. Glenn Keane, the animator that I had met early on who got me into Disney, was now animating Tarzan.
And it looked beautiful. It was sweeping. It was wonderful. I love it.
It was a remarkable. We got to go to Africa. And we sat with the mountain gorillas in Uganda, just to get a sense of the world.
How long were you there?
We went to Africa for 3 weeks. We spent 5 days, I think, three or 5 days with the mountain gorillas, just getting a sense of what it felt like to sit in that world, right? Because you don't, as an animator or making an animated film, you don't get to feel the place, typically, right? When you're on set, everything's there, right? You get to feel the plants around you. In animation, you don't have that. So that led to a big discovery called Deep Canvas, which we worked on in that movie, which was how do we place these characters in a world that's tactile, right? So we actually all the leaves and the trees and a lot of the movie we did in the computer, and then we painted on them. The background painters actually painted brush strokes.
Wow.
So that we could meld 2D art with 3D art.
Right.
And we could move the characters walking through trees and plants, and it was a way of replicating what we had discovered when we were there.
Right.
Right? And that wouldn't have happened if we hadn't gone on that research trip.
Isn't that great?
Yeah.
I mean, that movie stands the test of time to me. I love it.
It has the favorite opening of any movie that I've worked on.
Yeah.
It's really an amazing collaboration between music and visuals, and you can tell an entire story. Really, it's its own little mini opera
Right,
in a
and
way.
it's choreographed beautifully, really beautifully.
Down to the minute details, down to the colors of the sequence reflect what's going on emotionally with the characters. I'm really proud of that.
You should be.
That moment.
So let's now. Did you then jump to Enchanted? Is that the next?
No. Actually, there's a couple little transitions
what
between
are
that.
they?
Well, Glenn Close was a voice in Tarzan.
Right.
And she said to me, "You direct more like a live-action director than an animation director. Have you ever thought about doing a live-action movie?" And I just said yes,
Right.
having never really done it, but I'd done some theater,
Yep.
and I had done puppets, right?
Yep.
So I think that's where my language skills or the ability to talk with actors came from. And I said, yeah, I'd love to do that. Well, it just so happened that she was doing 102 Dalmatians.
Right.
And they lost their director.
She was Cruella de Vil.
Yes, she was.
Cruella de Vil.
And she said to me, or she actually said to the brass at Disney, "What about Kevin Lima?" So here I am now transitioning into live action.
With great success from Tarzan.
Right.
And then now.
So here I am, sort of like just thrown
Right.
into live action directing, having never done it before. I knew how to tell a story, and I knew how to develop a story in animation, but now it's translating all of that to it really is a different art form.
How different? Like Glenn Close, as an example, is that someone that you would rehearse? Does she prefer rehearsals, not rehearsals? How does that work?
It depends upon the moment, really, what you're doing in the film. We didn't have a lot of time for rehearsals. We were thrown into that movie pretty quick. They had lost their director.
So you were
So
thrown.
I was thrown into it pretty quick. I inherited a whole team that was already working.
Yep.
So we did a little bit of work on the script, and we just started.
Yeah.
I grabbed a hold of my cinematographer and said, "Can you give me a little tutorial on how to use the live action camera?" So he brought me in, and we went through all the lenses. We just sort of shot some film to see what different lenses did, how they worked, and we just started working. So there wasn't a lot of time for rehearsal, but she was a great mentor. She was. We spent a lot of time together, and she helped me through moments. There were a couple of times where I really struggled with blocking a scene in like a really tight quarters, and she said, "Oh, I could tell you were struggling through this, and these are the things that I noticed," and she'd share with me.
Like what kind of things? Can you be specific? Do you mind?
Well, you know what? The biggest thing really is that in a live action movie, everything comes together in one moment in time in front of the camera.
Yeah.
Right? So you're working towards that one moment. In animation, that one moment in time is spread out over 2 years. Right? So you're collecting the performance. You get the voice performance, you get the animated, the acting, the physical acting of the character from a different person. Right? You put that together with, a design of what the background, what the space is going to look like, what the shot is going to look like. In live action, you're making all those decisions in one moment in time. So you're blocking a scene on that morning. You've thought about it, and you put together your ideas, but then you show up on the set, and what I've learned to do over time, which is different than how I started, because I was an animation director, so I wanted everything to happen the way I had planned it on paper. Right? And realized over time, really, over a couple of films, that, it doesn't really work that way. You can come prepared, but you got to let go.
Right.
And I didn't know how to let go. There's in 102 Dalmatians, so there's a scene in the two villains get together, Gerard Depardieu and Glenn Close, and they're in this little trailer, and they've got puppies in a bag, right? And they've got huge costumes, and they're trying to move through this space, and we're managing puppies who aren't really in the bag. They're handed up through a hole in the bottom of the bag.
Right.
And I'm trying to put all this together, and I'm just struggling to get through it. And finally, Glenn noticed, and she made some suggestions to me. Like she said, well, maybe we could do this, or how about this? And I learned in that moment that we were all making a movie together, that I wasn't making a movie alone. Right? It didn't have to all fall on my shoulders. We were a community making a movie, and I could depend upon my cinematographer. I could have the strength to say, I'm struggling with this. Does anybody have an idea how to get through this? You know, Glenn, getting you around this, you know, the confines of this set is difficult. Do you have any ideas? And she said, well, maybe we could take this table out. And I thought, we can take the table out? That's okay, right? But someone designed that and put that there. And I realized, oh, it's an organic moment in time, right?
Know that table's not there, right?
Nobody else will know, you know, and we would have, you know, and it would bring us closer together as a community. Right? Because we were solving the problems of the movie together. Yeah. And I didn't know how to do that to begin with. Even though in animation, I had always done that. I had lots of collaborators when we were figuring out, but we had all the time in the world.
Right. And this is, time is money. We're moving
Time is
fast.
money, and if you don't get through your scene today, right, there's no tomorrow.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So,
that was a great learning moment, great teaching
it absolutely was. Absolutely was.
And what else did you learn from doing the 102 Dalmatians?
Oh man, so many things, you know.
Live action was completely different for you.
It was completely different. Ultimately, what I learned was I had to embrace the ways that I knew how to create. So growing up as an artist, as a puppeteer, making animated movies, I had to learn how to embrace that and tie that to what I was doing as a live action director, right? To allow those things to coexist. That's who I was, right? I had to learn how to do the prep, but then let go of the prep, right?
And you had professionals working with you. These are top-notch people.
I know. It was a great way to be thrown in, really, because I had a lot of mentors, a lot of people who had made many films before I was, you know, I had stepped foot on the set. I wish that I had had like someone like Robert Zemeckis or someone like that, who I could have, you know, walked on the set with and just sat there, because I'd never even been on a live action set before then, really. And here I was being thrown into the deep end.
Really?
So I learned, I mean, your first movie, I'm working with animals. I mean, hundreds of animals. So figuring out how to choreograph an animal who is pretty unpredictable. Glenn said to me one day, she said, you know, I know that when the dog does it right, that's the take you're going to use. So I better do it right every time.
Good
I got to be on top of my game every single time. And wow, you're absolutely right. If the dog does it, that's the take.
Right.
Really?
Wow. And so she was always prepared, it seems like a real professional.
She had done 101 Dalmatians already, so she knew the pitfalls of making that kind of movie. And she's, you know, she's Glenn Close, really. She's done it before.
Glenn Close, Meryl Streep, put them side by side, greatness.
Remarkable
greatness. And so from 102 Dalmatians, then what? Where's Kevin now?
102 was difficult for me because when it was actually released, it didn't do very well.
Okay.
So I was sort of placed in director jail, to be quite honest with you. And I didn't want to go back and do another animated film because I felt like I still had to conquer this. You know, I hadn't really conquered it. And I got terribly depressed when it was over. I took it all on myself.
Even though you were thrown in at the last minute.
Yeah, but when you're an artist,
it's your work.
You know, I agreed. You know, I wanted to be a part of this. So I was trying to figure out who I was in that moment in time. And I was luckily offered to do Eloise at the Plaza and Eloise at Christmas Time, which were shot concurrently with Julie Andrews, ultimately. So I couldn't pass up that opportunity.
Icon.
It was based on a children's book, a very famous children's book, which has a big following, especially in New York and East Coast kind of thing. And it was Glenn. And I thought, I have to take this on. I know a few things now. And I was thrown into a world, not with, well, there were a couple of animals in this movie, but with children now.
Right.
Right?
They always say children and animals.
Don't work with children or animals.
Right.
Well, 2 movies in a row, animals and children. But it was really a wonderful experience.
Yeah, Julie Andrews.
And Julie Andrews, which was remarkable. You know, I always think of this is that every morning she would say, "How are you today, love?" And I would walk away just thinking, Mary Poppins loves me.
Right.
Right? Coming from that world.
Right.
So that was a great working experience. She was wonderful to work with. I had some chops now. I knew what sort of some of my pitfalls were.
Yeah.
I knew I was going to test out some new ways of working, so I did a lot of storyboarding, let go of that storyboarding when I was on the set.
But you had it. It was there.
I had it. At least I had a place to start from.
And it was a safety
Right?
net. Right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I knew how to let go of it on the day. I learned how to work a lot faster because these were TV movies.
Yep.
So we didn't have the same kinds of budgets
Yep.
that we were dealing with, and still made a movie, I think, that TV movies that really feel like
A feature film.
feature films,
Yeah.
mini feature films, and I ended up winning the DGA award for the Christmas Time movie, Eloise at Christmas
Yes.
Time, so there was a redemptive quality.
And congratulations on that. You were like nominated a couple of times, right?
Well, throughout the making of all these movies, there's always been an element nominated, which
that-
I take a great pride in, right?
Sure.
Back on Tarzan, it won for Best Song.
Yeah.
Huge number of awards during that award season. Even 102 ended up with a costume, nomination,
Well, that's
which was
fantastic,
wonderful. That was probably my greatest collaboration on that movie.
Hugo
I
Awards
loved.
too, like Hugo.
Yeah, all those kinds of awards throughout all of
Right.
this, and then the DGA award, which was wonderful. And then ultimately, moving on to the next movie, which was Enchanted,
right.
it was nominated for 3 songs that
Wow.
year. 3 songs got nominated.
And that
so
was animation
remarkable.
and live action.
It was. It was really the moment to bring together everything I loved.
And Amy Adams, that was a whole.
It was remarkable. Amy had just, I don't think Junebug had been released when we cast her.
Yep.
So she had none of that buzz from that movie.
Right.
She walked into the room for an audition, and it was like remarkable. I had a fever that day of like 103 or something like that, and I was just beat. And she walked in, and for the next, I think we had a half hour. We were supposed to do 5 minutes, and I did a half-hour audition with her.
And suddenly you were 98.6?
Forgot that I was sick,
Right.
really, in that moment. And I knew it had to be Amy, and I had to go in and fight the studio for Amy because there was this push to hire a star,
Right,
right,
yep.
as the studios typically do.
Right.
And I said, no, this is a chance to have, Julie Andrews and Mary Poppins. Nobody really knew who she was. She had done some work.
Oh, The Sound of Music, right.
Right. She had done a little bit of work before Mary Poppins. And I thought, well, this is the same thing with Amy. We get to create a character. Amy gets to create a character first. Right? There's no stardom to deal with.
Isn't that great, too, for the audience? The audience just sees that character.
Right.
There's no baggage.
They make the discovery.
Right.
Right?
I love that.
In
right.
that moment.
Yep.
So that was wonderful to do that.
Yeah.
So
And so that is now, for you, you must have finally said, I found myself.
it was comfortable ground, right?
Yes.
Because the subject matter was something I knew innately, right? I'd grown up
Yeah.
with this. So I knew how to talk to Amy about the character because I was aware of the heritage of Disney princesses, right? People would make fun of me all the time on the set. The crew would make fun of me because I'd go up to Amy, talking to her about a moment, and I'd find myself suddenly lifting my pinkies, and becoming the character because I knew it.
Right.
I knew all the tropes. I knew it in an intimate way. I was attempting to create a love letter to Disney, right? When I first was involved, the movie was more sort of cynical, I'd say. It was around the time that Shrek had come out when they were developing this, and the movie had like this, I don't know, maybe a more R-rated
Dark undertone.
feel, darker undertones to it. I think at one point, Robert met Giselle at a bachelor party. She got mixed up with a couple of strippers.
Wow.
Really. So it had a totally different tone. And I said, no, this should be a love letter. We should be saying we adore this material, not that we're making fun of the material.
That's really important. Right.
So it took that big turn. in that moment. I started working with Bill Kelly, the writer, and we laid out a whole different plan. And that's when music became a big part of the movie, right? So music evolves with the character. As she becomes more human, the music leaves her mouth and is suddenly given to a singer in the moment or a voiceover song. So I was able to sort of lay this arc for a character that was about an animated character becoming more human, right? And not winking at the material, investing in the material, believing. Everyone who was involved had to believe that this is real for them, right? Giselle isn't aware that she's an animated character coming into the live-action world. It is existing in the moment for
It's her truth.
Right.
And in a way, that, I think, is one of the things that makes the audience root for her, that makes the audience care. She cares.
Right.
Because I think a lot of times when they do a little winking, and it separates you.
Right. She and Jimmy Marsden, I think, dedicated themselves to those characters in a way that seemed truthful.
Right. And that movie still stands up the test of time. I mean, I cannot tell you how many people tell me, oh, I love it.
It's unexpected for a lot of people, too. I think a lot of people went in thinking, okay, it's like a Disney movie. I'm going to go with my girlfriend. And guys left that movie thinking, well, that was pretty good.
Right.
And I hear that a lot from folks.
Yep, that's terrific. Yeah. And so now, from what happens now after Enchanted? I mean, this is huge. This is a surprise. In a way, wasn't that movie a big surprise?
I think it was. I think it was a surprise to everyone, even the studio.
That's what I mean.
The studio was surprised. It made a whole bunch of money worldwide, and here they were looking at, okay, what's next? And I was actually in the process of putting together a production deal at Disney, and then everything turned over in that moment. A new regime came in. Yeah. And I found myself out looking for work again. Wow. Right? So a new broom sweeps clean. Yeah. And so I went out into the world, and it led to 10 years of development. Now, where nothing ever got made.
But here's what the audience needs to understand, too. When you're in a development, and I've been there, too, and you can have maybe the film's not getting made, but there's a lot of money. You're still making a living. Yeah. You're still doing...
I made a good living during those years.
Right, but your films weren't getting greenlit.
Correct.
For maybe its expense or whatever the...
All different reasons, really. Right. Yeah. All different reasons. And, you're working with an actor who backs out of a movie at the last minute. Right. I made it right to the starting gate many, many times, like a week away from filming movies. Yeah. Having, gone through the location process and they just fall apart.
What about television also? Because now TV's different than it has been. And some of the programming also is in your wheelhouse. Have you thought about it, or do you want to stick with features?
Yeah, no, there were all different kinds of, I took many different meetings in those years. Yeah. And also the movie business is changing. Like you said, TV's now starting to do more interesting work. The whole thing's sort of shifting in that moment. They're making fewer films. Right, at that time too, and they're discovering that in this moment. So there were all these different things that were happening at that time, and it was hugely disappointing. I worked for 2.5 years on an animated movie. Yeah. At DreamWorks. Spent huge amounts of money on that movie. We were just ready to start animating, and the whole sale of DreamWorks happened, where they sold to Universal. And a whole lot of movies, like I think 7 movies, got closed down in that moment. Mine was one of them. And they spent a huge amount of money on that. And in that moment I realized, okay, I need to find a different way to make movies. I can't be held hostage by a studio any longer. So I started to look into writing and developing
your
my own
projects.
Yeah.
Now let me ask you something. Are all your projects, and I know you are working with your wife too, right?
I am. It's been a big...
She's done some great films as well, iconic films.
Yeah.
So now you guys formed a company together?
Well, it started with us, we were actually in an airport, and I said, what do you think about doing this movie? I'd had an idea. What do you think about maybe doing this together? She'd written a couple of movies. I'm married to Brenda Chapman, who directed Brave and The Prince of Egypt and was a big influence on the story of The Lion King.
Lion King, right. Great movies.
So I know that she's an expert storyteller.
You're both powerhouses, really.
We did okay. And we thought about, we had always taken pride in not having worked together, right? Because we'd worked on the same movies, but had never worked together.
Right.
We always said we have our own careers, we're going to make it on our own. That was really important to us. She's a woman developing during this period when, there's this push for women to take on more leadership roles, and she was absolutely the forefront of that. So it was important for her to keep developing herself as an artist. So we really worked hard at not working together. But there's this moment in time when she had a movie at DreamWorks at the same time they get closed down. So he said, well, what about working together? And I had an idea that seemed like it was right in my wheelhouse as a director, right? It was an animation, live action combo idea.
Yep.
And we started writing that.
Yeah.
And as we were writing that, we were approached by a studio to start a production company. So these two things sort of came together. I can't tell you what it is yet because we're just like on the verge of announcing it.
Yeah.
But there was some synchronicity, like you say. And so we've taken control of our own selves, right, as artists. And we're taking that step in order to, to be in more control of the development of our movies. And we've even written this one. So we've taken another step towards having more control.
When do you think we'll be able to hear about this?
Very, very soon. I think it's probably going to happen in the next couple of months.
Oh, we can't wait. Kevin, any advice you want to share with any of the young filmmakers or storytellers or performers, our audience, that you would like to share?
I think it's really about doing, right? The reason that I am doing what I'm doing is that I took a hold of the reins and did things, right? And I think today's, up-and-coming filmmakers have the opportunity to do that in a way that I didn't, even as growing up, right? You can make a movie on your iPhone now.
Right.
So if you're really driven, you've got to do. You can't apply for a job as a director out of college, right? You've got to do. You've got to make movies, right? In order for someone to see, oh, that guy's got talent. I think one of the things that really pushed me is that when Disney said no, I went off and directed some stage work. I said, okay, I got to figure out how to make this kind of jump. And I did a version of Into the Woods, a community theater version of Into the Woods. And the Disney folks went and saw that and said, oh, look at him. He's making other things. We said no, and he's still doing.
You're being you.
Right? I can't, there's no other way, right? So if you have that desire, it's not about just asking, which I think I said earlier, there's a piece of it, but you gotta do, you gotta prove to the world that you deserve to be a director, that you deserve to be an actor. It's not a gift.
Do you think that when you do, you showcase, you show who you are, you show what you're made of, you then create your own luck? I'm a big believer in that. You do good things, and 9 times out of 10, good things happen just because you were just being you, doing your work that you're supposed to do.
I think it's absolutely true. I think that's true. I think that there's this sense now that because things seem easy, right, with the internet, and there seems to be so much success in that world, that comes easy. Someone recorded a song in their bedroom, and suddenly they're Justin Bieber, right?
Right.
Well, that kid did a lot of doing, right? He was behind the scenes pushing to make that happen for himself.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that's the piece of it you don't necessarily see, is that it really does take that constant doing. And when an avenue doesn't work out, find another avenue.
Earn it.
Right?
Go and earn it.
Make it happen for yourself,
Yeah.
right? So that when you go in, when you get an opportunity, luck again, right? You've said the right thing to the right person, you sent your work to everyone, and one person responds, right? Then you have that opportunity to prove yourself because you've already done it.
You've done the work, you have the enthusiasm, you make it happen.
Right.
Well, I want to thank you for your enthusiasm, your drive, your passion, your talent, your good qualities. The films that you do are great stories, well told, with a lot of heart. And I want to thank you so much for coming to Double Feature and sharing your wisdom with me and with the audience.
Well, it's been a real pleasure to be here. Thank you for asking me.
Thank you, pal.
All righty.